Hi everyone, welcome again to this series of webinars held by the Chartered Insurance Institute. My name is Mike Brockman, and this is the third talk that I've given on my favourite topic, which of course is telematics in motor insurance. Today, however, I wanted to take you through the concept of creating a smart FNOL process for motor claims. FNOL, of course, means first notification of loss, a very difficult and critical part of the motor and indeed telematics process. If you get this smart FNOL approach right, and this can improve your loss ratio perhaps by as much as 5 points on its own. It's a most forgotten about piece of telematics asset value, as I call it, but probably the most valuable because, of course, motor insurance is all about claims, and anything you can do to improve the claims process is going to be valuable. Okay, so what am I going to take you through today? I'm going to explain to you how a smart FNOL process differs from the standard FNOL process in motor, the type of data that is of most valuable, or most value rather, for creating a smart FNOL process. I'll also talk you through some of the data considerations that you need to think about, especially when it comes to whether devices are self-fit or perhaps professionally fitted. There's specific issues that can arise in a self-fit solution, and this needs to be factored into your build. The other thing that's important in telematics is that the crash algorithms that you might develop, of course, have to differentiate between real accidents and events that look like an accident. This could be something like a door slam, going over a pothole, going over a cattle grid, or indeed, if devices are self-fit, it could be that the device is thrown around in the kitchen, not installed properly, and this creates a shake in the device, G-forces, which could, if you're not careful, look like a real accident. So a filtering process is very important to put in as a first stage measure such that you're not creating too many false positives and too much work for the claims department. But of course, what's really important in the FNOL process, and indeed the most important aspect of claims assessment, is assessment of liability. Until you know whose fault the claim was, really determines how you're going to handle that claim, and more importantly, who pays for that claim. So I'm going to tell you how the telematics process can really help you understand the circumstances of the accident and help you determine liability, which of course is critical. Okay, so let's go back to the start and just talk through how conventional FNOL tends to work. Of course, every insurer or broker will have a different process, but essentially, if there is no telematics, you have to wait for the customer to notify you if they've had an accident. So this could come in normally through a phone call. It could come through on an app, and that would then trigger a process where the FNOL agent would go into a dialogue with the customer. And normally they would have some sort of script to find out the details of the accident, capturing the customer's version of events, and trying to assess, the damageability, what sort of help is required. Whether the car needs to go into a repair shop, which repair shop it needs to go into, depending on damage, what type of car it is, for instance. All of these things would be established through this FNOL scripts, which the FNOL agent would go through with the customer. And sometimes, this process could take anything up to about 30 minutes, which of course is quite a long time, especially when the customer has just had a traumatic event, perhaps the first time they've ever had an accident, and can be a bit sort of disorientated in their recollection of events, even though that might have recently happened. But sometimes an insurer will only know that an accident has happened or a claim has been lodged through the third party. This could be, again, a third party insurer notifying the at fault or the other party insurer, or it could come from a solicitor, or it could be logged on the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice portal, if there's been a injury from a third party. So it's quite a complicated process. And of course, nothing really happens under this conventional process unless someone admits liability, because the admission of liability triggers what sort of service you could offer your customer. For instance, if you could establish that your customer was not at fault and their car was damaged and would be off the road for some time, you could get a hired car to your customer very quickly, of the same sort of status as the car that's been in the accident. And of course, if it's not their fault, then the at-fault insurer will pay. Similarly, if your customer is at fault and they are off the road, then they would have to rely on a courtesy car being available at the repair shop to keep them mobile. That unfortunately is not always the case if there's no available courtesy cars, and that customer who's at fault could be without a car until he gets his repaired car back. So it's quite a tricky sort of process, because everyone is told when they take out an insurance policy not to admit fault. And all this does is just elongate the claims process and lengthens what we call in the industry the key-to-key times, the time it takes you to from the accident to when you physically get your keys back, car fully repaired and can get back on the road again. The aim should always be to make that as short as possible, but under conventional rules, sometimes this can take some time, and time, of course, costs money. Lots of other people can be involved in the accident process, as we know. There's lots of accident management companies around, lots of lawyers trying to help customers that are injured, if it's not their fault, to get compensation. And it's not too difficult for people to find organizations that will happily act on their behalf. And all this does is just complicates the situation. Normally means that the claim takes longer to settle, and of course, to the at-fault insurer will cost more. So how does this change with telematics? Well, telematics gives you the opportunity to really make this whole claims process much, much more efficient. So what tends to happen is that the crash algorithms that are developed are triggered if the vehicle is thought to have been in an accident. And it does this by having an assessment of the G-forces within the car. And I'm going to go through this in much more detail to give you an idea of how this is done. And that will trigger an alert. And that alert could either be voice activated within the car. Have you had an accident? Are you okay? Under a voice instruction inside the car. The customer would then validate yes, no, to determine whether it's a real accident or not. Or indeed, this alert could go straight to the FNOL agents. And the sort of data that the FNOL agents would get would be the location of the alert, the G-forces that come from the vehicle. Is it a big accident or is it a smaller accident? Of course, they would have quite a lot of detail in terms of what happened to the vehicle before it was having an accident, i.e. what speed were they traveling, what roads were they traveling on. They could have access to things like Google Street View, which would give them a view of the circumstance of the accident in terms of its positioning and location. Was it a crossroads? Was it on a roundabout? Was it a T-junction? Was it down a country lane? Was the road narrow? Was the road wide? Is there usually parked cars on either side? All of those sorts of things can come from Google Street View once you know the location. And you could get a pretty good idea of what happens. And essentially the process would then be that the agent, once they've got this alert, would contact the customer, normally by phone or sending a text. And once you're in a dialogue with the customer, when it's safe to do so, of course, you can say to the customer, we think you've had an accident, and please tell me what happened. And the customer will give you their version of events. I was driving along the road, and this car pulled out in front of me, and I went straight into the side of that car. And so at that point, the agent could then compare the customer version with the events that are predicted from the telematics data. And if it all matches, happy days, liability can be quickly determined at fault, not at fault, or even partial fault, which you can get if on a lot of roundabout situations. And you can deal with the claim proactively. And that's the key difference. It's the speed in which you can deal with this claim, determine liability, even get to third-party intervention if, in fact, your customer is at fault, because it's far better to get the third parties involved into your repair shops to give them hired cars on your rental terms, or indeed, even if they are injured, to try to settle fairly, quickly and efficiently to get them compensation quickly. All of these things will end up reducing the claim payout to the insurer, but also making the claims process much more efficient for your customer and indeed any third parties. And that's the real difference with telematics, being proactive. So let's just have a look at how this is done in more detail. The first thing you've got to do, though, is in order to interpret this data, is to understand G-forces in themselves. So most telematics devices will give you G-forces in 3 dimensions. We call it the X, Y, Z axis. And here I've got a picture of a car, and you'll see that the X-axis is the G-forces which go through the car from back to the front. And the Y-axis is the G-forces that go across the car from the driver's side to the passenger side. And the Z-axis is the vertical G-force from the bottom of the car to the top of the car. And it's important to understand in an accident situation how to interpret these, whether they're positive or negative, which might tell you something about whether they're accelerating or braking, or whether they're turning left or turning right, and that sort of thing. So the X-axis essentially tells you whether it is front or rear acceleration and braking. So whereas the Y-axis will tell you the direction in which the car will go. So, so just to give you an example, if you're harshly accelerating, you could produce a G-force on the X-axis of minus 0.4, let's say, just through harsh acceleration. If you're harsh braking, a G-force of greater than, let's say, 0.6 G would be typical. And harsh cornering, whether left or right, would be 0.5 G or minus 0.5 G. So essentially, if it's positive on the Y-axis, you're turning more left. If it's negative on the Y-axis, you're turning more right. If the X-axis is negative, you're accelerating. If the X-axis is positive, you are braking. So you have to get in your heads, you know, the signs, whether positive or negative, whether that means front or back or left or right, and all of these sorts of things. And sometimes it can get a bit confusing, but that's the general principles. Okay, so now let's think of how do we do this in an accident situation. Now, what tends to happen is that most telematics devices will concentrate on the bigger claims because, first of all, the bigger the G-forces, the fewer events there are that look like accidents. But also these are the most expensive claims. So you tend to get the big G-force events are the more expensive impact claims. Whereas if you get accidents or events below 1G, you can get lots of other things, as I mentioned, potholes, cattle grids, all sorts of obstacles in the road. You might just hit the corner of the curb. All of these things will cause G-forces less than, let's say, 2G, and they could look like potential accidents as well. So the lower you go, the more events will happen in your car that will have a G-force in the range of what a real accident could be. And I mentioned hard braking, cornering, and acceleration all around about 0.5 G would just be normal on typical driving. So this particular accident had a G-force greater than 2G overall when you combine the individual G-forces X, Y, and Z. So this particular one had a negative G-force on the X-axis of about 1.8 G, so minus 1.8 G. And also had a negative G-force on the Y-axis. If I just remind myself, referring to my notes, of minus 0.42 G on the Y-axis and plus 1.29 G on the Z-axis. And if you combine all those three G-forces, the sort of average G-force of all three would be 2.28 G. So just about the sort of threshold that most telematics devices will start to trigger an alert. Just for reference, you would expect about, well, probably less than half of all claims, actual claims that is, would have a G-force of greater than 2. So G-force of 2 is quite a sort of critical level. It's a level of which over 2 you've got a much higher chance of catching real claims, whereas they're below 2, which is 50% of all claims, is much more difficult because lots of other events could give G-forces of less than 2, which also look like claims. But this one here, the accident alert has been triggered. Because it's minus X, that means that it's been accelerating. So that will tend to be looked at as a rear shunt, because the car in the back has pushed the car in front forwards. And on the X-axis, the car has veered to the right, which means that the impact at the back would be on the left, because if the impact was more on the left, the car would move slightly to the right. So from this telematics view of this particular alert, you would make the assessment that it is a rear hit, slightly on the left-hand side. And you can see that we've got a picture of a car and the arrow, which is the predicted point of impact. And that comes from these G-forces. Because there's been quite a big positive Z factor, I would surmise that the car behind has probably caught the lip of the underside of the back of the vehicle and shot it up on impact. And that's what's called the Z-axis to be sizably positive. And of course, you've got the location, the time of day. You've got a map here which shows you that this accident, if you see the little triangle with a circle around it, at the junction of a roundabout, and this is quite a busy roundabout here because you've got a dual carriageway car going over the roundabout, and this is a typical what I call roundabout accident. So we've all been there. You're waiting at the junction to go around the roundabout. The car behind you's thought you've probably gone. You haven't gone because a car was obstructing you and he's gone in the back of you. So you can see it's relatively low impact at 8 miles an hour. So again, that fits in with the story of the roundabout type of claim. But there's likely to have been sizable damage here. So there's the picture, and that would be instantaneously with your ethanol agent. So he would have this view straight away, and he would then contact the customer and validate whether that situation that he's assessed is correct, and then you deal with the claim straight away. And the faster you can deal with that, the better. So if you had passengers in your car, for instance, and you clearly established here it was not a no-fault claim, you could deal with those third-party passengers as well if they were injured. You could get a hired car if your customer's car was not roadworthy, and just deal with the claim straight away. And this is a great example, this particular one of there should be no issue determining or there should be no issue or dispute with liability, given these facts. So, of course, this is a relative straightforward one. Others could be more complicated. You could potentially have multi-car pile-ups, etc. But it's amazing what the telematics data can establish, even when there's multi-vehicles involved in an accident. You've got the same sort of information, all the G-forces, which tell you where the impacts were, and especially if there was a secondary impact in a multi-vehicle circumstance where your car's been hit in the rear and then your car hits the one in front, you can clearly establish which event was first, and therefore, again, establishing whose fault it was. That can be very important. And looking at the circumstance as well gives you a great insight to accident reconstruction. The crash algorithms that we've built at Finco concentrate more on vehicle-to-vehicle impacts, where we try to measure what we call the absorption of energy of G-force. What tends to happen is when one car hits another car, there will be an impact with G-force, but there will be a transfer of energy which elongates the G-force impact over time, and that gives you a clue to damageability as well. So whereas if you hit a brick wall, what you're going to get there is more of a spiked G-force because there's no give in the brick wall once that car has hit it. And again, the crash algorithms need to allow for these different situations, but most of them, of course, are vehicle to vehicle, whereas you then have to look at the G-force, what I call the G-force signatures, in other circumstances as well. And you only learn this over time through trial and error, seeing real accidents, what you predicted. Did you get it right? No, I didn't. Why did the crash algorithm get it wrong? How do I modify it to make sure that if that situation happened again, your crash algorithm would pick it up? So it's a real sort of AI type approach where the more claims you've got, the more you can improve over time your crash algorithms. Okay, let's move on now to some of the smaller accidents. I mentioned before that 50% of claims or more actually have G-forces of less than 1. And this is why really telematics in some people's eyes has not succeeded, because it's very, very difficult to to determine real accidents from just normal driving events at low G-forces. So you would get many more false positives. However, you can't ignore these, and you still want to use the technology as much as possible to give you an insight to liability and circumstance, just the same as the bigger accidents. And the way we do this at Finco is to record every 1 second the maximum G-forces in each 1 second period on the XYZ scale. And through this approach, you can't proactively initiate FNOL. But what this does mean that if FNOL comes through on the traditional basis, from your customer notifying you or a third party notifying you that there's been an accident, you can validate it at that point. You can go back to the date of accident, the time of accident, to prove that your insured car was on the road in question at that time, and you can see the maximum G-forces that happened in every 1 second interval. This is an example here where the accident happened at 3 miles an hour, and we referred to these as LVI claims, low velocity impact claims or incident claims, and there are a lot of these actually, and it's really important to be able to validate these just the same. So this particular one will show you there's a 1.8 G-force in the x-axis, a 0.95 G-force on the y-axis, and 2 G-force on the z-axis. So the actual combined G-force on this particular claim or accident was quite big. However, because it was only at 3 miles an hour, there wasn't much transfer of energy. There's probably not much damageability, very low damageability. So that didn't trigger our alert. But from here, you can certainly see the impact. And from this, you can determine that the impact was on the front of the vehicle, passenger side. So positive X, positive Y tends to mean front impact on the passenger side. And you know that this is likely to be very low damageability. So again, you can go through the whole process with the customer. You know, ask the customer what happened, what was the circumstance, match with this telematic view. All agree, yes, deal with it quickly, efficiently. If it doesn't agree, ask more questions. And that's how you can identify fraud. You know, if in this circumstance you got some injury claims popping up, then you can certainly challenge them. And quite a lot of fraud actually does happen at this LVI level, and these are the most difficult ones for insurers to challenge. But telematics can really help in this situation. Okay, just some things to think about. I mentioned right at the very start about professionally fitted devices versus self-installed devices. Very important distinction here. If you have a professionally fitted device, what normally happens is an engineer will go round to the customer's house, fit electronically the device, hook it up to the battery, hook it up to a power circuit. Wires will be hidden. Sometimes the device is hidden in the engine compartment, for instance. And what that means is that there's much less opportunity for the customer to tamper with it. So when there is an accident, you can be the assurance that the device is in one place, fixed solidly to the car, is high, and therefore the data that you get from an accident point of view can be relied on to a higher level. With self-fitted devices, as I mentioned before, these are, by definition, installed by the customer, and they have an opportunity to play around with the device before it's been installed, and sometimes that can mean an ethanol alert could be triggered if the customer has powered in the device and then taken it out, for instance. That process, that tampering, can sometimes look like an ethanol alert. And these need to be filtered out before they're sent to the claims department. Otherwise, there'll be lots of false positives, which you, of course, you don't want. So over time, you work out and learn the circumstance of these G-force signatures or patterns, as I've called it, and you can use those patterns to filter out what you think are lookalike ethanols caused by tampers. It should be, relatively straightforward to do, but you will get more of false positives in this sense with self-fitted devices than you will do with professionally installed devices. Of course, professionally installed devices are more expensive for the insurer. Self-installed are much cheaper by definition, because you don't need the professional engineer to fit, and it's a trade-off. But if you're clever, you can make it such really the quality of data that you get from both is very comparable. So the objective of any crash algorithm is to identify as many real crashes as possible with the minimum number of false positives. Of course, everyone is now familiar with the concept of false positives from COVID testing, you have the same concept with COVID testing, whether you do the test yourself or you send them away to a professional outlet which does the test. Again, you're going to get more let's say abuse of the situation when people are allowed to do them themselves rather than the experts. Exactly the same situation is with telematics, and that's one of the challenges. But I would say a good ratio of false positives to real crashes is about 5-1. And it's unrealistic, really, for it to be less than this. Otherwise, you'll start missing real crashes. And you don't really want to miss real crashes. You want to maximize the amount of alerts that you have when there is a real crash, such that you've always got that information available for validation, even if it cannot be used in a proactive sense. So that's the sort of challenge that you have. So moving on now and wrapping up, really, there's no doubt that telematics can greatly improve the ethanol process and reduce claim cost and certainly identify fraud. The talk I've given today is just really the tip of an iceberg. There's so much more to this, but I'm hoping I've given you a flavour of how this can be done. It's very difficult. This is not something that's easy, but if you stay with it, certainly you learn quickly. And as long as you've got the ability to adapt your processes, adapt your crash algorithms, you can improve. You can improve the process really, really quickly. So proactive F&O will reduce your claims cost by determining liability quickly, which is the most important thing in claims handling. Get your vehicles into your repair shops at your repair costs. Improve third-party intervention, and this will massively improve your loss ratio. But ultimately, what you're aiming for is to give honest customers the best possible accident service that you can offer, whether they're at fault or whether they're not at fault, with the fastest or quickest possible key-to-key times, because all research says that what most people want once they've had an accident is their car back, and they want it back quickly. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you've enjoyed it. And please, anyone that doesn't get involved in telematics, I think we're only, as far as an industry, tipping the ice at the tip of the iceberg. The penetration of telematics within the motor insurance industry is only about 5%, which means 95% of customers are missing out on a much, much better claim service. And one goal I have personally is to make sure that telematics is available to all customers, all premium ranges, big or small, because even when the premium is small, the benefit that you can get from this claims process is big enough to justify the expense of the technology, because you'll get much happier customers. You'll be able to deliver a much better claim service. You'll retain these customers at the best, cheapest premiums possible for as long as possible. And those three principles are not dependent, really, to a large extent, on the size of the premium. So 95% of the industry is still there for grabs, and I hope that happens very quickly. Thank you very much.